Hello, everyone. Here we are on chapter four of our book and module four here in our class. Hopefully, you are enjoying this introduction to Catholic moral theology. I've been enjoying the discussions as we've been going along. And here in module four, chapter four, we're really starting to get into uh, thinking about natural law theory a little bit more and fleshing out some of the fundamentals of Catholic moral theology. So I think Waddell does a nice job of explaining kind of the big picture and why it matters. And now we're kind of getting into the nitty gritty of how it all works. And I'm not going to repeat his basic overview of natural law theory as a moral system because I think he does a good job of explaining the different features and like how natural law works as a system of moral thought. Um, I just want to highlight a couple of key things that stood out to me and that I think might be worth reflecting on a little more, and that we can also then go into in our discussion in the coming days. And one of the things, again, I think he does a nice job of um, illustrating in the book and in the chapter is really emphasizing this idea that the whole aim of natural law, this understanding of the human person and how we should live, is aimed at the fulfillment of the person, is aimed at kind of ultimate and true happiness, right? And I think, again, one of the dangers in a lot of moral reasoning, moral thinking, is getting consumed by or focusing on the rules and the lists and ignoring the fact that those things exist in order to help us better know how to promote the real good of people, right? That the rules don't exist in and of themselves, right? Kind of as Jesus says in the Gospels, right? The Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath, right? And the reason God gives us these laws is for our good, um, and not simply that there have to be rules to follow per se, right? So as we, one of the reasons this is important, right, is that when we get to those complicated topics, right, when we get to the issues where there isn't necessarily a definitive church teaching on um, technology A or procedure B or lifestyle C, right, that as we're trying to work out what the best response is going to be, this is where we need to go back to, okay, well, what's the overall goal? The overall goal is the fulfillment of our nature and our true and ultimate happiness, right? And so that's going to help us then navigate what we ought to do in difficult, ambiguous, challenging circumstances, right? Is that we have to aim at what we know is truly good for people and do our best to work out the details from there, right? And as he explains in the chapter, um, acting appropriately in difficult, challenging circumstances is going to be much more likely and much easier if we have developed the virtues, right? And this is, I think, really one of the key definitive features of Catholic morality, right? Is this idea of the importance and centrality of the virtues and the danger of the vices, right? That we get these secondary natures, if you will, right? These characteristics of ourselves that we build up one way or another and that really shape the course of our lives. And personally, right, this is one of the things that actually drew me to the Catholic faith as I was studying theology, right? In that in my Christian life up to that point, I had often seen, right, the virtues that I wanted to have, the virtues that I was lacking, um, but didn't really have a sort of sense of how to get there, right? Sort of just praying, oh God, make me a more temperate person. Oh God, make me a more uh, courageous person, right? I simply had this goal that I saw that I wanted, but not really a roadmap for how to get there, right? And I think one of the real strengths of Catholic tradition is helping us connect point A to point B, right? That this is where I'm at, this is the person I want to be. How do I get from here to there, right? And that's really what natural law fills in, right? It is that, well, you get from here to there by developing the virtues, by shaping your own character over time, and you do that through specific individual moral acts, right? And so we talked in the follow-up to last module in the little video about the nature of a moral act according to natural law, that we look at the object, the intention, the circumstances, right? And we figure out how those fit together to actually promote the good of a person, and then it's a moral act. Um, and the good news about Catholic moral thinking and Catholic moral life is that we don't have to constantly do that, right? We don't have to sit back and analyze every single action with these kind of three criteria. Now, sometimes we need to do that, and that's a good thing, but it's kind of overwhelming to try to do that with every choice we make in life. And this is where the habits come in, right? That as we practice this analysis and this careful deliberation and action one time and then two times, then three times, eventually what happens is it becomes, as we would say, second nature, right? That is exactly what a virtue is, that it becomes second nature for us to be temperate, or it becomes second nature for us to be courageous in a situation, right? And that um, through these repeated moral acts, we build up the virtues and we become a virtuous person who can then act rightly with far less sort of conscious effort going into every decision. Right. In a lot of ways, it's like other areas of life, other skills, right? So in terms of cooking, right? I'm an okay cook. I'm not a superstar, but I can cook a meal, right? But that's something that happens over time. At first, you have a recipe and you watch YouTube videos, right? And you have to practice very deliberately how to saute an onion, right? And you follow the directions, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't, right? Sometimes the pan is too thin, sometimes that burner is too hot, whatever it might be, and it burns, or it's not done enough, right? But what happens is, as you follow those different recipes in a very careful, conscious way over and over again, eventually you get to the point where you don't even really think about it. And you can adapt and adjust to the specific circumstances of the moment and have a sense of how to do it properly, right? And the virtues and moral life are very much like that, right? That it is something that you um, become second nature, right? And I think this is also, I don't think Waddell talks about this a whole lot. I came to this in part also through studying philosophy, right? And this is something that Catholic moral tradition draws from Aristotle in particular, right? That Aristotle, in his ethics, in his Nicomachean Ethics, which is a very famous um, moral treatise by Aristotle, he spells out this process very clearly of the need to develop the virtues so that you can have a happy life, right? And one of the things that he explains, that Waddell explains as well, right, is that, being a virtuous person doesn't necessarily mean that life is always going to be a happy in sort of the immediate emotional sense, right? That sometimes tragedies happen, sometimes illnesses happen, whatever the case may be. Um, certain factors are going to be outside of our control. But the best way to be as happy as possible in any situation is to be a virtuous person, right? And both Aristotle and Catholic tradition would say that a vicious person, a person who has chosen poorly over and over, so that it becomes actually second nature for them to be intemperate, to be cowardly, to be unjust, right? Those people, even in the best of circumstances, aren't going to be happy. They are just fortunate, vicious people who can't really enjoy even what they have, right? And I think we all know countless examples from fiction, from real life, from our own circles of acquaintances where that is the case, right? And we also probably have countless examples of the other way around, where people who are able to find happiness and fulfillment even in trying circumstances because they have developed these virtues. So I think that is a really important aspect of Catholic morality. And I think one of the things I would add to kind of Waddell's presentation is that this can actually be I think a really powerful tool for drawing people to the Catholic faith is this very pragmatic, very practical way of thinking about how to become a better person. That it is, in fact, a deep embedded part of Catholic tradition. So I think that is a really good thing to reflect on, right? And I'm going to divide up this module video in two. So this one I'm almost done with, and we'll look at the specific cardinal and theological virtues here in a minute. But I did also want to point out another thing that Waddell mentions, but we could talk about a little bit more, right? Is that how do we discern the right way to live? How do we discern what a virtuous, happy life looks like and the kind of actions that lead to that? So part of what natural law says is that you can understand virtue and morality by looking at the world around us, right? And that obviously our faith is going to tell us a lot about how we ought to live. We have the Beatitudes, we have the Ten Commandments. Uh, but again, one of the things that drew me to Catholicism, right, is that we can combine faith and reason, and right, and that we can look around in the world and see examples of good, successful living and examples of bad, unsuccessful living. And we can draw from that in an immediate way. We can also draw from the other sciences, right? We can draw from the social sciences and the medical sciences and look at what leads to good, successful living and what goes the other way, right? That we can um, think about, for example, how to practice temperance in our eating. Our faith tradition is going to tell us about ways of eating that are conducive to a good life. But also, look, medicine and science are going to tell us things about how to eat properly so that it promotes your overall well being, how to balance your enjoyment of food or drink or whatever it might be. And that as Catholics, we can draw on the expertise of these other disciplines of the world more broadly in order to improve our own lives, in order to help us understand and attain virtue, right? That we can look at what a successful human life looks like and follow those examples. And we can also see what unsuccessful lives look like. One of the things that tragic stories that always comes to mind when I think about this, right, is Hugh Hefner, right? Hugh Hefner, for some of you who are old enough, might know who that is. He was the founder and owner of Playboy for many years, right? And in sort of a worldly sense, he seemed to be very successful. He was rich, he was famous, he was surrounded by these women and lived a very sensuous lifestyle. So he projected this. But near the end of his life, there was a reporter, I forget which magazine it was for, if it was Atlantic or Vanity Fair, some reporter who spent a lot of time with him and wrote this report of his lifestyle, and it was just awful and depressing, right? That this faded, dingy mansion with this sad figure living this kind of very empty, emotionally disconnected life. It was actually very tragic, right, to read about that man's life. Um, and again, you can look at that, and a purely secular person can look at that and say, wow, that life is not actually going to lead you to true happiness and fulfillment, right? And natural law would say that is good, important information that we can use, right? Countless examples like that can help us shape our understanding of how to live and how not to live. Again, I think Waddell explains a lot of this also very well. Those were just some things that I wanted to highlight here. We'll come back in just a minute to talk a little more specifically about cardinal and theological virtues.